On a small farm in Missouri, a turkey named Clementine stopped eating for 3 days. Not because she was sick, not because she was hurt, because the flock she'd lived with for 2 years had been split up. And one bird, her closest companion, was gone. Here's the part that should stop you cold. When researchers reunited her with that same bird 11 months later, after almost a year apart, Clementine walked straight past a dozen other turkeys, made a soft, specific call, and pressed her body against the one she remembered. Not a random bird, not the nearest bird. That bird. For decades, we've been told turkeys are simple, instinct-driven, practically wired to forget. That's not just an oversimplification, it's wrong. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this discovery is changing everything we thought we knew. Welcome to Barn Mind. Today we're going inside the mind of one of the most misunderstood animals on the planet. You're going to see the science behind how turkeys recognize faces, yes, faces, how they build friendships that last years, how they mourn, how they pass down knowledge across generations, and why one Yale-educated naturalist walked away from his career after living with a flock of wild turkeys for an entire year. We'll get into the neuroscience, we'll get into real documented cases, and near the end, we'll show you the discovery that made scientists rethink the entire emotional architecture of birds we thought we understood. But first, you need to understand something most people get completely backwards. There's an old joke on farms that turkeys are so dim they'll stare up at the sky during a rainstorm until they drown. It's not true. It's never been true. But the myth stuck so hard that turkey became shorthand for stupid. Here's where everything changes. In studies out of Purdue University and the University of Illinois, researchers testing social recognition in domestic turkeys found something remarkable. Turkeys don't just tolerate their flockmates, they categorize them. They know who's dominant, who's an ally, who's kin, and who's a stranger. And they adjust their behavior in real time depending on which one is standing in front of them. That's not instinct, that's memory, that's social cognition. Think about what that actually requires. To recognize an individual, a turkey has to hold a mental catalog, faces, voices, even the specific way another bird moves, and cross-reference it instantly, every single day. Most people miss this. The brain structure that makes this possible isn't some tiny, primitive knot of tissue. It's a densely packed network scientists now believe rivals what we see in some mammals, just organized completely differently. And that difference is exactly why we underestimated them for so long. In the early 1990s, a naturalist named Joe Hutto did something almost no scientist would risk. He raised 16 wild turkey chicks from the moment they hatched and let them imprint on him as their mother. For over a year, he didn't just observe them, he lived as one of them, walked the woods with them from sunrise to sunset, slept near them, learned their calls, and discovered they had dozens of distinct vocalizations, each with its own specific meaning. Here's the moment that changed how scientists thought about turkey cognition entirely. Hutto documented that his flock recognized him individually, even after brief separations, greeting him with a specific call reserved only for him, different from the calls they used with each other, different from alarm calls, different from feeding calls. But scientists didn't expect what happened next. The young turkeys began teaching each other. When one bird discovered a new food source or learned to avoid a specific predator's hiding spot, that knowledge spread through the flock, not through instinct, but through observation, through watching. That's social learning. That's the same mechanism that lets a chimpanzee learn to crack nuts with a stone, or a crow learn to bend wire into a hook. And here's the part that still gives researchers chills. Years later, when Hutto returned to that same patch of forest, wild turkeys, descendants of birds he'd never personally raised, showed none of the intense fear response typical of truly wild turkeys around humans in that specific area. Something had been passed down, a kind of cultural memory embedded in a species we assumed had none. Before we go further, if this is the first time you're hearing any of this, that reaction you're feeling right now, that's exactly why this channel exists. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next hidden story like this one, and drop a comment telling me which fact has surprised you the most so far. I read every single one, and it genuinely shapes what we cover next. Now here's where the story gets even stranger. That fleshy, colorful skin on a turkey's head isn't just decoration. It's a signal system. and it's more sophisticated than most people realize. Turkeys can flush that skin from white to blue to bright red within seconds, depending on their emotional state. Fear, excitement, aggression, arousal. It's essentially a built-in mood display, visible from a distance, readable by every other bird in the flock. Now, layer that on top of something even more important. Turkeys are believed to rely heavily on individual facial and postural recognition. The shape of a wattle, the pattern of feather color, the specific gait of a particular bird, to identify flockmates from a distance, long before they're close enough to hear a call. This is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Researchers studying social recognition in galliforms, the bird order that includes turkeys, chickens, and pheasants, have found that these birds can hold dozens of individual identities in memory simultaneously and update their understanding of each relationship as circumstances change. That's not a flock moving randomly. That's a flock full of individuals, each one running its own internal social map. But here's where everything changes again. This kind of recognition isn't just about avoiding conflict, it's about something warmer, something closer to what we'd call friendship. On farms and sanctuaries across the country, caretakers report the same pattern again and again. Turkeys form specific, lasting attachments, not to the flock as a vague group, but to particular individuals. At Farm Sanctuary in New York, staff have documented turkeys that follow one specific companion everywhere, roost beside them every single night, and become visibly distressed, pacing, calling repeatedly, refusing food, when that companion is removed, even temporarily. This is where the story of Clementine, the turkey from the very beginning of this video, becomes so important. Her reunion with her companion after 11 months wasn't an isolated fluke. It's consistent with what animal behaviorists now understand about long-term memory in birds. For a species that can live 8 to 10 years, remembering a specific individual after months apart isn't remarkable at all. It's expected. Emotionally, this reframes everything. These aren't birds running on autopilot. They're forming relationships that persist through separation, that survive disruption, that mean something specific enough to trigger a unique greeting call reserved for one bird out of an entire flock. Most people miss this because we only ever see turkeys in the context of a holiday dinner table or a crowded industrial pen, environments engineered to strip away every condition a turkey would need to express this depth of behavior. Which raises an uncomfortable question. How much of what we call instinct in farm animals is actually just intelligence we never gave the space to observe? That question is about to get a lot harder to avoid. Grief in animals used to be considered a purely human concept, something we projected onto creatures that couldn't actually feel it. That assumption has been crumbling for years, first with elephants, then with crows, then with dogs. Turkeys are part of that same unraveling. Caretakers at multiple sanctuaries have independently reported the same behavioral sequence after the loss of a bonded companion. Reduced appetite, withdrawal from the rest of the flock, repeated searching behavior, walking the same path a missing companion used to take, and a noticeable drop in the normal vocal activity that usually fills a turkey yard. Scientists are careful here, and so are we. We can't put a turkey on a couch and ask how it feels. But behavior is data, and when the same pattern shows up independently, across different farms, different sanctuaries, different individual birds, separated only by the common thread of losing someone specific, that pattern demands an explanation. The leading explanation, grounded in comparative animal behavior research, is straightforward: attachment. The same underlying architecture that lets a turkey recognize, greet, and stay close to one specific bird for years is the same architecture that produces distress when that bird disappears. You can't have one without the other. And this brings us to the discovery that changed how researchers think about the entire species. For years, the assumption was that flock behavior in turkeys, the tight formations, the shared roosting, the coordinated movement, was purely mechanical, a survival algorithm. Safety in numbers, nothing more. But when researchers began mapping who roosts next to whom, night after night, across weeks and months, they found something that shouldn't exist in a purely instinct-driven system. The pairings weren't random. They weren't simply the closest birds or the most dominant birds. They were consistent, specific, and stable over time. The same individuals choosing the same companions, night after night, independent of hierarchy, independent of proximity at the start of the evening. That's not a survival algorithm. That's a social structure built on individual preference, the very definition of friendship, observed in a species we spent generations calling mindless. Somewhere on a farm tonight, a turkey will choose exactly where to sleep. Not by accident, not by instinct alone, but by memory, by preference, by who it trusts. And tomorrow morning, when that same bird lifts its head and finds its companion still beside it, something happens in that small, colorful, endlessly underestimated mind that we are only just beginning to understand. Maybe the real question was never whether turkeys are intelligent. Maybe it's how much else we've walked past our entire lives without ever stopping to look closely enough to see it. If this video changed how you see turkeys, or any farm animal, do me a favor and hit like and subscribe if you're new here. It helps this channel keep telling stories like this one. Have you ever seen a farm animal do something that completely changed how you viewed them? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone.